An Airbus A320 is rapidly descending. They were 2,000 feet below their assigned altitude, and an air traffic controller at Marseille radioed the flight crew to ask what cruise level they were cleared for, but they received no response. Over the next 30 seconds, the controller tried to contact the flight crew 2 more times, without any answer. At 9:34, Marseille Control tried to contact the plane on a different frequency. The plane didn't respond. From 9:35 to 9:39, Marseille Control attempted multiple times to get in contact with the plane. An air traffic controller from the French air defense system also tried to get in touch, along with another aircraft in the area. Each time there was no response. At 9:40, Marseille Control triggered a distress phase. They had lost contact with the plane, and they believed that the passengers' lives were in imminent danger. At 9:41, Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed into a mountain in the French Alps, killing all 150 occupants on board. One question now remains: why did the plane crash? At 9:27 AM, on Tuesday the 24th of March 2015, a Germanwings A320-200 leveled off at its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. 27-year-old co-pilot Andreas Lubitz is being treated for suicidal tendencies and was declared unfit to work by his doctor. Lubitz kept this information from Germanwings and instead reported for duty. His mental health had begun to spiral in the past couple of days. He was scared and he wanted to make it stop. He has decided to commit suicide and crash the plane. On the earlier outbound flight from Dusseldorf to Barcelona, Lubitz had practiced setting the autopilot altitude dial to 100 feet several times while the captain was outside of the cockpit. It is possible that he meant to crash the plane on that flight but couldn't go through with it. This time would be different. At 9:30, the captain left the cockpit to use the toilet. Almost immediately, the selected altitude on the Flight Control Unit, or FCU, changed from 38,000 feet to 100 feet. The autopilot changed to the open descent mode, and the autothrust changed to throttle idle. The aeroplane began to descend. Born December 18th, 1987, Andreas Lubitz had dreamt of becoming a pilot his entire life. In December 2008, he began training at the Lufthansa Flight Training School in Germany. However, only 2 months into the program, he pulled out after being hospitalized for a severe episode of depression. He sought help from a psychiatrist, and in under a year it was determined that the depressive episode was fully resolved and Andreas could go on with his training. But this meant filling out an FAA application declaring if he had any previous mental disorders. Andreas lied on the form and was caught. However, the FAA had decided to give him a second chance and he was allowed to continue his training. Soon enough, he fulfilled his life goal and joined a low-budget subsidiary of Lufthansa called Germanwings as a first officer in June of 2014. At 9:34, the captain requested access to the cockpit, but his request was ignored. As he stood outside, locked out of his own cockpit, he slowly began to process what has happened, and the passengers could see it all too well. The co-pilot had hijacked the plane. The captain used the cabin's interphone to try to contact the co-pilot on 4 separate occasions. The cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, picked up knocking on the door. It also picked up muffled voices asking for the door to be opened. In the CVR recording, you could also pick up distressed passengers screaming for their lives. Due to the A320's layout, every single passenger on board that flight had a clear view of their captain frantically trying to gain access to the cockpit. As a last resort, the captain tried the emergency codes to open the door, but these didn't work either. As this was happening, Marseille Control had begun contacting the flights asking why they were beginning to descend. After a certain incident in 2001, the cockpit door was redesigned to protect the pilots from hijackers. Normally, to enter the cockpit, the crew member must first call the cockpit on the intercom and press the pound key on the keypad, which will then buzz the cockpit. The pilot inside can choose to either ignore the request or switch the door control from norm to unlock, allowing for the door to be opened. If crew members are seriously concerned with those in the cockpit, they can enter a special emergency code, which triggers a 30-second timer. If the cockpit does not respond to this timer, the door unlocks for 5 seconds. However, the cockpit can completely override all emergency access from switching the door control from norm to lock. This was the setting used by the co-pilot to prevent the captain from entering the cockpit. Back in the cabin at 9:39, the cockpit voice recorder picked up violent blows on the cockpit door. The captain had attempted to break it down, but cockpit doors have been heavily reinforced with steel and Kevlar since 2001. He stood no chance. The CVR also picked up screaming and crying passengers as those with window seats could see the ground rapidly approaching. Andreas Lubitz could be heard breathing calmly. 1 year after joining Germanwings, Andreas's mental health complications returned. He was suffering from a hypochondriacal disorder as well as emergent psychosis. He had tendencies and was taking heavy antidepressants. He wasn't okay. During a search of his apartment, detectives found multiple letters written by multiple doctors indicating Lubitz has been declared unfit to work for a very long time. But this information wasn't passed on to Germanwings, as under German law, employers do not have access to employees' medical records and thus rely on employees to declare their own lack of work fitness. Lubitz's complications were worsened as recently he had been unable to sleep because of what he believed were flashing lights. He consulted over 40 doctors, fearing he was going blind. Motivated by the fear that going blind would cause him to lose his pilot's license, destroying the career he had dreamt of his entire life. A few days leading up to the crash, criminal investigators revealed that Lubitz conducted web searches on his computer, which included ways to commit as well as cockpit doors and their security provisions. At 9:40, the terrain warning system was triggered and Marseille Control lost radar contact. In the final minute, everyone on board knew what was about to happen. Amongst the passengers was an entire school class returning from a field trip in Spain. The captain, Patrick Sodenheimer, was a 34-year-old father of 2. His wife set up a foundation in his name, intended to help children handle grief and crisis. His last recorded words were, "For God's sake, open the door." In January 2015, Lufthansa Group announced that it would discontinue the Germanwings brand and replace it with Eurowings starting in late 2015.